This, as you have already surmised, is the famous Tom Bowery.
What about the famous?
You will be in 20 minutes, Tom. And with us tonight from Hong Kong, via the magic of modern technology, is Leigh's sister, Bronwyn Bowery-Ireland.
Hi.
We've got 20 minutes to have a little chat about who Leigh was and who Leigh was to you. So, Tom, we're 5 minutes away here from the Sunshine Hospital, which is where it all began.
That's right.
You were there at the beginning and you were there at the end also. Can you tell us a bit about Leigh as a young kid?
Well, to me, he was just a normal boy. My son. We loved him. He was just a family-orientated boy. He didn't have any specific genius or anything like that at all. That was all he was, just our boy. Much the same as our daughter. She's just our girl.
What sort of things did Leigh enjoy doing when he was young?
Well, he was family orientated, really. We all were, sort of thing, that we didn't enter into anything of a special nature. It was just the family, and we're fortunate that we lived on one side of the road and the other part of our family, grandparents, lived on the other side of the road, opposite us.
So this was Sunshine in the 1960s. Bronwyn, what are your recollections of growing up in that suburb at that time?
It's extraordinarily different from today, of course. Or I suppose to put, Leigh growing up into a context. Our family originally moved into the street that I grew up in, and Leigh grew up in, around the 1920s or just before, and moved a house from Deer Park to this particular street, Morris Street in Sunshine. And so by the time, Leigh and I arrived onto the scene in the 60s, our family had been in that neighbourhood for 40 years. So it was kind of an extraordinary situation, because Sunshine was also an area that was developing and transforming and was sort of also the outskirts of the city of Melbourne. And so, across the Cororoit Creek, we had new housing estates that were opening up for people that you now might see way further out in the Melbourne district, that sprawl out further, much further. But at the time in Sunshine, it was like that. So it was a completely different thing. We knew everyone in the street. Everyone knew us in the neighbourhood. It was very much like a small village feeling.
And Tom says Leigh was like any other kid. Maybe he was. What are your recollections of that, Bronwyn?
Well, I don't think he was like any other kid, because I think that one of the things that was, Leigh, when Leigh entered the room, you had to notice. It was never a situation where, you wouldn't know that Leigh was in the room. He was quietly doing something. That would never, ever occur. And even from a very small person, he ensured that. And so growing up with him, he was always, he announced one day, I'm going to be a magician. So it was really interesting to see some magic before. And so he was always going to be a magician. He was always going to be a performer. He really liked being on the stage, but he was also quite shy at times as well. So, kind of had to sort of figure out how to do that. But he treated, many situations entering a room like a stage, walking onto a stage. I remember he would always be quite competitive. He was very driven. He really wanted people to like him. I remember when we were growing up, we had a holiday house in Mount Macedon, and our whole family again was in that street. My grandmother bought the land and then handed it down to generations. So we would spend school holidays with cousins, and Leigh would always do things like he was 9 years older than the youngest cousins or so.
That was Big Leigh.
And my cousin, one of them, sorry,
Big Leigh.
Big Leigh.
Yeah.
And my cousin is sitting in the audience, Cameron, and Leigh would do things where he'd say, "Okay, it's school holidays. Who wants to be on my team because I'm Big Leigh and I'm amazing and I can do all this? Or do you want to just be on Bronwyn's team and it's going to be really boring?" And so all of these young, impressionable cousins would go, "Oh no, I want to go with Leigh. Leigh's going to do all these amazing things," of which inevitably he did, and I'd have to sort of tag along. That was my life with Leigh.
You had your work cut out, Bronwyn. That's. I thought following Valerie Hex was hard, but that's really hard. Yeah. Tom, what do you remember about those Macedon days?
Well, we just point at Bron was saying about Leigh doing things around the house. You almost need to have a street directory when you enter the house to find out he'd move things around and rearrange the furniture and all that sort of thing. So you're never quite sure what was going to happen.
You have told me that, but
yeah.
what would be the impact when he changed it around? Would it be better?
Yeah, well, it was just a different atmosphere, really, and just different dynamics. That's all it was, really.
Leigh had an operation when he was young, and I believe that while he was recuperating, he taught himself crochet and knitting. Mm-hmm. And before long, he was able to sort of show complicated stitches to his grandmother over the road.
Yeah. Well, no, it was my grandmother in Bendigo that was talking to us, and she was doing some crocheting work, and I don't know what to do with this, Elise said, "Give us a look here, Grandma, Oh, yes, you just do so and so." Telling a 60-odd-year-old woman how to do the crochet. It was quite amazing, really.
Pretty handy at it.
Yeah.
Bronwyn, perhaps I'll ask you first. The family was a Salvation Army family. Tom worked for the Salvation Army for a number of years, and I think your wife Evelyn did also?
Yes. Yeah.
What was it like growing up in a Salvation Army family with Big Leigh?
Well, in the Salvation Army, there's no alcohol, there's no swearing, there's no gambling. So Leigh and I would do those things when our parents weren't around, basically.
Thanks very much. The things you find out,
Yes, so we would have pretty intense swearing matches at each other in the quiet of after school before the parents were home from work. But on a serious note, it was challenging for us growing up because, I suppose some people had sporting clubs that they belonged to, different things. We had the church that was very involved. My mum was massively involved in the church. Emotionally, her mother was in the same, the Salvation Army as well. So it was, kind of part of belonging to the extended family. And so it was challenging. I can remember growing up in that situation and feeling like I was never part of it. I didn't belong. There wasn't a sense of belonging there. And Leigh felt the same. We never felt like they went, "Oh, we really get you guys. You're really out there." I do recall that, perhaps growing up in that situation, one of the things that did occur was that we had people around us, because Sunshine at the time was quite an industrial area and a fairly low socio-economic area in some places. We had a lot of people around who, had quite challenging lifestyles. And I remember that my parents would continuously say to both of us that we have to do better. We have to be better people. We have to be the best. We have to step it up, so there was always a push to kind of be your best at whatever you do. There wasn't meant to be any compromise. There wasn't allowed to be anything that, we didn't want to end up, sounds a bit judgmental, but we did not want to end up in that sort of situation of not being a very powerful person.
Yeah, it wasn't dictatorial, it was encouraging.
We don't want to get into family politics here, but it's interesting.
Don't we?
Just do as you're told.
Well, Tom, let's leap right into the family politics. It's not easy talking about your sexuality with your parents. Did Leigh ever have that specific conversation with you and your wife?
No, not particularly. I don't recall, but Auntie June used to come for a meal of Thursday night, and that seemed to be the occasion where a couple of young kids would come up with something or other. June being a spinster lady, and they would ask perhaps an embarrassing question or something like that. And, but that seemed to be the trait of a Thursday night. And Friday, when June went to work, what did the kids say? What did Bronwyn say? What did Leigh say? There was always some story there that as to what transpired.
He famously had a tattoo inside his mouth for his mum. Perhaps you didn't know that. No. Right. Okay. Well, what was his relationship like with? What was his relationship like with his mum?
I think that he was probably closer to his mum than what he was with to me, really. But again, I would imagine that that's something that's common, really, with children. That the mum is home and they come home to mum, but dad's still at work, and so that there isn't the interchange there that transpires normally. I know I'd get home and my wife would say, so and so, and you'd try and interchange with the kids, and they've already done that. They've cooked that. That's what's been baked. Let's go on with the next thing, sort of thing. So, I think from a male perspective, you dip out on those things, whereas mum has been involved with it.
Well, perhaps I could ask one final question about parenting. You're both parents. I found three different things that Leigh said at different times in interviews, and I know that Leigh said a lot of outrageous things in a lot of interviews, but these interested me. He told Sue Tilley once, "I'm glad I was brought up properly, because then when I'm being bad, I know I'm really being bad." He told Hugh Laurie, that Hugh Laurie, "Why do I want to provoke? I might have to get back to my parents on this." And then the last quote was from a bizarre interview with Bananarama, of all people, when he said, "I've got my parents' support in some strange way. They say they'll never understand, but they're there if I need them, and it's touching to have that foundation." For Leigh to come out and say those sort of things when he was this countercultural figure at that time, asserting that there was a link and that he did feel a sense of love from his parents. Well, what does that mean to you now, looking back on that?
No doubt. It was just not in question, really. He was our son. I recall where we were in England visiting Leigh, and he was being interviewed by someone, and we said to him afterwards, "Leigh, why did you say that? You know it's not true, and yet you say those things." And he said, "Well, these people come to you with their preconceived ideas, expectations. That's what they want to hear. You say it, and they go away happy. End of story." And that is true, really, that when you see people being interviewed on the telling and things, that you see, things that aren't correct, really, and yet they run with it, sort of thing.
Well, perhaps it relates to our theme of impress or revolt. Bronwyn, could I ask you, before we move to the artistic side of Leigh, for any closing thoughts about the family dynamics and what it was like?
I think that, that it was challenging for Leigh because we did come from a close family and an extended family. You know, it was pretty huge, and so at the age of 18 to leave that environment and to go to a place where he didn't have anyone, he didn't know anyone. It was really, really challenging for him. It was challenging for him when my mum died. It was challenging for him, lots of different situations and times, but it was also challenging because he was trying to, create a new identity for himself. He was trying to forge forward. And so you need to leave the past behind, but you have an emotional tie to it. So it was a pretty complex situation for him to have to manage all the time.
Bronwyn, I think I mentioned when I chatted with the two of you earlier in the week that in my opinion, and I'm happy to argue with anyone if anyone wants to disagree, I think that in the history of Australia there's been no arts or cultural figure who has the international influence of Leigh Bowery, that he has shaped the narrative of arts and culture around the world in a way that no other Australian has done. You mentioned to me the things that are going on at the moment directly linked to Leigh, let alone linked to his influences. What are some of the things you've noticed?
Sure. I mean, last year Leigh was turning 60, so there's been a lot of activities and events as a result of that anniversary. But yes, I see, there's many things. People are writing books about him. People are interviewing people on Instagram who've, been inspired by Leigh. There was an event in London that closes in 2 days' time at the hospital where Leigh died. It has been demolished except the chapel, and so there's been an exhibition of his work in the Fitzrovia Chapel. There's lots and lots of things. I recently had an Italian university write to us and say, can we use images in our art school? So the list is very broad, it's very diverse. Minty re-established itself last year. And so, it's music, it's performance, it's design. You hear things, Lady Gaga talking about things, you hear other people, RuPaul talking about the influence of Leigh Bowery. People now recognise, oh, that's a Bowery look. And so that's quite a significant thing to be able to say that.
And that look, you can see, as you say, Lady Gaga or Alexander McQueen or the Huxleys or so many things. Yeah. But interesting also, I think, is what our MC was saying earlier. Tom Christopherson has got some art upstairs here, and he said that it's his Leigh's absolute dedication to his vision, despite convention or resource, which I think is so important to echo. So it's actually it's an attitude, it's a stance towards your art and the world. Tom, earlier on you told me that there's some misconceptions about Leigh, some myths. You had a son for 33 years,
yep.
And then you've had to live with this international legend for another quarter of a century.
Yeah.
What are some of the misconceptions?
Well, there's a lot of things that I don't agree with personally, and I think Leigh was an artist. He was an actor, and he would more or less portray himself as to what the audience are looking for. So he wasn't doing what he would be or what he was. He was acting towards the audience, and he would do some probably outrageous things to my way of thinking.
To anyone's way of thinking, that, including Leigh. That was his philosophy.
Yes, I think he was aware of that really, and yes, some of his attitudes were, I just want to shock the audience, and that's what he'd set about doing, and whether it was right, wrong, or polite or what, that was beside the point. But he set about to shock the audience, and That's what he'd do.
Tell me about when you went to visit him in London and all of a sudden this fellow who grew up in the Mallee is hanging out with Boy George and Lucian Freud. How did you find that?
Lucian had a big influence, I think, on Leigh, and Leigh also had a big influence on Lucian. There was one time where Leigh was doing some acting at Bowery Gallery, I think it was, in the West End, and Lucian Freud was sitting on the floor. There was a two-way mirror there where they could see Leigh, but he couldn't see them, and he was just sitting there in awe of what he was doing, and so it was a two-way thing there, and they got on famously, really, and it was quite amazing. I met Lucian personally a few times.
Did he take you for a drive?
Yes.
What was the problem with that, Tom?
Well, it was no problem. It was in his Bentley, of course, and he was driving and drove us to and when we came back after the event, we were talking to Leigh about it, and Leigh said, of course, he hasn't got a licence. he's never had a licence, and he had two Bentleys, you know.
Bronwyn, you also have had to live with the legend, and we tend to sort of sanitise and even sanctify these people. Is it hard for you to hold on to the real person who was your brother?
No, I don't think so. I suppose, again, they say that our formative years are the ones that influence the most and, kind of guide who we are. And so, growing up with Leigh was a big part of who I am today. And so I don't forget who he is. I think that, sometimes some of the challenges that I see today for me personally is that, I know that Leigh hated being typecast. He hated being put in a box. Everything he did was to push the box, if you like, or, kind of push them wide and far. And so I see sometimes where he's labelled in certain ways that he would be outraged by those kinds of descriptions of him.
He said at one point, if you label me, you negate me.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
How would he have gone in the age of pronouns and our current understanding of identity?
Well, again, all I can say is that Leigh was one of the fastest learners that you could ever imagine. He was super competitive, and he would have had to have been out there first creating the language. So we may have had different language created by Leigh, who knows? But he was always at the forefront of what was going on, always. And so I don't think that he would find that a struggle. I think that in his mind, he's always thinking about, what's sort of the next thing, what's the next shock. If we come to this place where, there's a Bowery Theatre in Sunshine where performances are happening like we've just seen, then if that's the norm, which we know is not completely the norm, but if it's becoming...
You ain't seen nothing yet.
Pretty much. Then there'll be more to come.
Yeah, well, thank goodness for that. Bronwyn, do you have any final thought you'd like to share with us?
No, I was thinking about sometimes, you sent me a question once that said, is there some things that I'm never asked about with Leigh? And, one of the things that I think that, the personal side of Leigh is something he kept quite private. But one of the things I know about him is that, he was a warrior, he was very robust, and he thought of life as a struggle or as something he had to keep fighting. He was a magician. He could appear and transform a situation and create magic wherever he was. But he was also a very, very, sometimes intense lover. And he had some great romances that I remember experiencing his first true love when he was younger. And it was a big moment for him. And then when he was living with Trojan in London, and, Trojan was the most fun that I've had. He's just laughing all the time. And Leigh loved Trojan immensely. So there were many facets to him, as well as, you know, all the things that we see out in the public arena. There were a lot of things about him. He was generous. He was incredibly fast-witted. And he was very perceptive in being able to pick up very quickly what your weaknesses were and then to address them.
In rather straightforward terms, perhaps.
Well, to many people, he was many things, really, and he could adapt to whatever the mood was that was presented. Well read, you know, he knew what he was on about, sort of thing, and in a lot of cases he was ahead of whoever was asking the questions, and
Tom, my final question to you is, what does it mean to you as someone who's lived around this way for all your adult life? What does it mean to have the Bowery Theatre on an ongoing basis commemorating the life and impact of your son?
Well, I suppose, firstly, I'm amazed, sort of thing, that people think that much of Leigh, and that they want to bestow that privilege on him. But he was still just my son. That was all, and things that are happening now, I just wonder what's going on, sort of thing. And there's people, I remember it was a function in RMIT, and this lad came up to me and, you're Leigh's dad. Oh, God, you know. You knew Leigh? No, never met him at all. Didn't know him. Just in awe of what he was doing, and it was quite amazing, really. And I'm aware of all of those things, but again, it was my son.
That's magnificent, Tom. Absolutely beautiful. Bronwyn Bowery-Ireland, thank you so much for being here. I think there's a few tears in eyes here today. There might be a tear in your eye as well. And Tom Bowery, thank you both so much.